The tray of medical instruments hit the floor with a sharp clatter, and every head in the room turned at once. Claire Bennett did not flinch. She knelt, gathered the scattered tools with steady hands, and placed them back on the tray as if nothing had happened. But the laughter behind her told a different story. "Careful, Inc," said a voice from across the room. "Wouldn't want you to drop a scalpel on your foot. Might ruin that tough girl image you've got going." 3 young men in training fatigue stood near the doorway of the clinic, arms crossed, grinning at each other like they had just told the funniest joke in the world. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man named Derek Coleman, tilted his head toward Claire's forearm, where the edge of a faded tattoo peeked out from beneath her rolled-up sleeve. Claire pulled her sleeve down without a word and continued organizing the tray. "I'm serious," Derek said, stepping closer. "What's a nurse doing with ink like that? That's not exactly a butterfly or a little heart. Looks like something a real operator would have." The other 2 men, Ryan Brooks and Tyler Ford, chuckled along, clearly enjoying the show. This was their first week at the Naval Medical Facility, a place that treated some of the toughest, most highly trained personnel in the entire fleet, including active Navy SEAL candidates preparing for advanced training. Claire had been assigned here only a few days earlier, but already she had become a target for their jokes. She lifted her eyes and looked directly at Derek. Her expression did not carry anger. It carried something closer to tired patience, the kind of look a person gives when they have heard the same insult too many times to count. "I have work to do," she said quietly. "If you need medical attention, I'm happy to help. If not, please clear the hallway." Derek raised his hands in mock surrender, still smiling. "Just curious, that's all. No offense." But there was offense in his tone, and Claire heard it clearly. She turned back to her cart of supplies and pushed it down the hallway toward the next patient room, her shoulders straight, her pace even. She had learned long ago that reacting only fed the fire. Silence was safer. Silence kept the past exactly where it belonged, buried and quiet. Behind her, she heard Ryan mutter something to Tyler, and both of them laughed again. The words were too soft to make out, but she did not need to hear them. She could guess. New nurse with a tattoo. Must be trying to look tough. Probably got it in some tattoo parlor to impress people. The theories were always the same. Always shallow. Always wrong. Claire reached the next room, where a young trainee sat on the examination table, nursing a swollen ankle from a training exercise. She smiled gently at him, checked his injury, and began wrapping it with practiced efficiency. Her hands moved with a precision that came from years of experience, the kind of experience that could not be taught in a classroom. "You're really good at this," the young man said, wincing slightly as she adjusted the bandage. "Thank you," Claire replied. "I've had a lot of practice." "Where did you train? Some big hospital?" Claire paused for the briefest moment, her fingers still on the bandage. "Somewhere far from here," she said simply, and then changed the subject, asking him about his pain levels and his recovery plan. The trainee did not press further, but Claire's mind had already drifted elsewhere, to a place she rarely allowed herself to revisit. She pushed the memory down, the way she always did, and focused on the task in front of her. By midday, word of the incident with Derek and his friends had spread quietly through the clinic staff. A few of the older nurses exchanged glances, but said nothing directly to Claire. They had seen new arrivals get teased before. It was almost a tradition among the young trainees, a way of testing boundaries, of establishing who held power in unfamiliar spaces. Most of the time, it faded after a week or two, once the newcomers proved themselves capable. But something about Claire made the teasing linger longer than usual. Perhaps it was her quiet confidence. Perhaps it was the way she never explained herself, never offered excuses, never seemed the least bit bothered by their comments. To young men used to intimidating others through bravado, her calm was unsettling, and unsettling people often respond by pushing harder. Later that afternoon, Claire sat alone in the small break room, eating a simple lunch of crackers and fruit. The room was quiet, save for the hum of a refrigerator in the corner. She rolled up her sleeve absent-mindedly and looked at the tattoo on her forearm, tracing the faded lines with her finger. It was not a decoration. It was not a fashion choice. It was a mark earned through blood, sweat, and loss, given only to those who had served in one of the most demanding and dangerous roles in modern military medicine. Very few people outside that world would ever recognize its meaning. To most eyes, It looked like nothing more than a simple design, a few interlocking shapes with a small emblem in the center. To those who knew, it told an entire story without a single word. Claire had chosen this quiet assignment, specifically because she wanted distance from her past. She wanted routine. She wanted to help people heal, without anyone asking too many questions about how she learned to do it so well. She had not expected to be mocked for the very thing that once saved dozens of lives, including her own. The break room door swung open, and Margaret Doyle, a senior nurse with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes, stepped inside. She glanced at Claire, then at the tattoo still visible on her arm, and something flickered across her face. It was not confusion. It was recognition, though she said nothing about it. "You holding up all right?" Margaret asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "I'm fine," Claire said, pulling her sleeve back down. Margaret studied her for a long moment. "Those boys can be a handful. Don't let it get to you." "It doesn't," Claire replied, and for once, it was almost entirely true. Margaret nodded slowly, though her eyes lingered on Claire's covered forearm a second longer than necessary. She seemed on the verge of saying something else, something more, but she held back. Instead, she took her coffee and left the room, leaving Claire alone once again with her thoughts. Outside, in the corridor, Derek Coleman leaned against the wall talking to Ryan and Tyler. Their laughter had faded into a quieter conversation. "You really think there's something to that tattoo?" Ryan asked. Derek shrugged. "Probably not. She's a nurse. Nurses don't get tattoos like that unless they're trying to look interesting." "She didn't seem bothered, though," Tyler pointed out. "Most people would have said something. Maybe she's just used to it," Derek replied, though a small seed of doubt had already planted itself in his mind. There was something about the way Claire carried herself, calm under pressure, steady hands, quiet confidence, that did not quite match his assumptions. He pushed the thought aside and told himself it was nothing. But it was not nothing, and in the days that followed, that small doubt would begin to grow, slowly chipping away at the certainty he carried into every interaction with the quiet nurse who wore her sleeves rolled down and her past hidden beneath them. As the sun began to set over the naval facility, Claire finished her shift and walked toward the parking area, her bag slung over one shoulder. The teasing from earlier still echoed faintly in her mind, but she refused to let it settle too deeply. She had survived far harder things than a few careless comments from young men who knew nothing about real hardship. She paused at her car, glancing back at the building behind her, its windows glowing with the last light of the afternoon. Somewhere inside those walls, a training schedule was already being prepared for the following week, one that would bring a very important visitor to the facility, a visitor whose arrival would change everything Derek Coleman and his friends believed they understood about the quiet nurse they had chosen to mock. Claire had no idea what was coming. She simply got into her car, started the engine, and drove home, unaware that the past she worked so hard to keep hidden was about to resurface in the most unexpected way imaginable. The following morning arrived with a heavy gray sky, and the naval facility buzzed with its usual early activity. Trainees jogged in formation along the outer track, their boots striking the pavement in unified rhythm, while instructors barked commands that echoed across the open field. Inside the clinic, Claire Bennett had already begun her rounds, checking charts, preparing supplies, and greeting patients with the same calm professionalism she carried every single day. By now, the nickname had spread beyond Derek Coleman and his two friends. Other trainees, hearing the story secondhand, had begun referring to her as Ink whenever she passed through the hallways, though most did so quietly, unsure of the joke's origin, but eager to join in anyway. Claire heard the whispers, caught the sideways glances, and noticed the way conversations sometimes stopped abruptly when she entered a room. She said nothing. She simply continued her work, treating every patient with the same care, regardless of what they thought of her. Margaret Doyle noticed the growing pattern as well, and it troubled her more than she let on. She had worked at this facility for over 15 years, long enough to recognize when a joke had crossed from harmless teasing into something closer to disrespect. She decided it was time to have a word with the young men responsible, though she chose her approach carefully, unwilling to reveal what she suspected about Claire's past without permission. She found Derek, Ryan, and Tyler near the equipment room, preparing for their afternoon training session. All three straightened slightly when they saw her approaching, aware of her reputation for no-nonsense discipline. "A word," Margaret said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The three men followed her a short distance away from the equipment room, exchanging uncertain glances. "I've heard the nickname you've given the new nurse," Margaret said, crossing her arms. "I'd advise you to drop it." Derek shifted uncomfortably. "It's just a joke, ma'am. Nothing serious." "Jokes have a way of becoming something else when they're repeated enough," Margaret replied. "You don't know anything about that woman. Not where she's been, not what she's done, not what she's survived. I'd be careful making assumptions about people you know nothing about." Ryan frowned, curiosity flickering across his face. "Do you know something about her?" Margaret's expression remained unreadable. "I know enough to tell you that you should watch yourselves," she said simply, and then turned and walked away, leaving the three men standing in confused silence. Derek watched her go, his earlier confidence wavering slightly. "What was that about?" "No idea," Tyler said, though his voice carried less certainty than before, but she seemed pretty serious. "She's probably just protective of the new nurse," Ryan suggested. "Doesn't mean there's anything to it." Derek said nothing, but the seed of doubt planted the day before had grown a little larger. He tried to push it aside as he headed toward the training field, telling himself that Margaret's warning meant nothing, that Claire Bennett was simply a quiet nurse with an unusual tattoo, nothing more. That afternoon, during a rigorous obstacle course exercise, Derek pushed himself harder than usual, determined to prove something to himself, though he could not quite articulate what. As he launched himself over a wooden barrier, his ankle twisted awkwardly on landing, and a sharp pain shot up his leg. He gritted his teeth and limped the rest of the course, refusing to show weakness in front of his fellow trainees. But by the time the exercise ended, his ankle had swollen considerably. He was sent to the clinic for evaluation, and to his quiet dismay, Claire Bennett was the nurse assigned to examine him. She knelt beside the examination table, her fingers gently probing the swollen area while Derek watched her closely, half expecting some sign of resentment or coldness given their earlier interactions. Instead, her expression remained entirely professional, focused solely on his injury. "Does this hurt?" she asked, applying light pressure to his ankle. "A little," he admitted, wincing. "And this?" "More," he said through gritted teeth. Claire nodded, continuing her examination with steady, practiced movements. She rotated his foot gently, checked his range of motion, and pressed along different points of his ankle, all while maintaining a calm, focused expression that betrayed nothing of her own thoughts. Derek found himself studying her hands as she worked. They moved with a confidence and precision that seemed almost out of place for a routine ankle injury, the kind of steady control he had only ever seen in instructors who had faced real emergencies, not just training exercises. There was something in the way she worked, quick but never rushed, gentle but never hesitant, that unsettled him more than he expected. "It's a moderate sprain," Claire said finally, straightening up. "Not broken, but you'll need to stay off it for at least a week. I'll wrap it and give you instructions for icing and elevation." "Thanks," Derek muttered, feeling oddly humbled by the professionalism she displayed despite everything he had said to her over the past few days. As she wrapped the bandage around his ankle, Derek found himself unable to stay silent. "Can I ask you something?" Claire glanced up briefly. "You can ask. That tattoo," he said, hesitating slightly. "I didn't mean anything by the jokes. I was just curious." Claire's hands paused for a fraction of a second before continuing their work. "Curiosity isn't the problem," she said quietly. "It's what people do with it that matters." Derek fell silent, unsure how to respond. There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, only a quiet weight that made him feel smaller than he had expected. He watched her finish the bandage, her movements precise and practiced, and for the first time, he found himself wondering if there was more to this woman than he had assumed. "You're free to go," Claire said, stepping back. "Keep it elevated tonight, and come back if the swelling gets worse." Derek nodded, gathering himself to leave, but paused at the doorway. "Thank you," he said, and this time, the words carried genuine sincerity rather than mockery. Claire simply nodded in response, already turning her attention to her next patient, leaving Derek to limp out of the clinic with far more on his mind than a sprained ankle. That evening, in the barracks, Derek found himself unable to shake the encounter from his thoughts. He sat on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying the calm, steady way Claire had handled his injury, the quiet authority in her voice, the strange weight behind her simple words. He thought about Margaret's warning earlier that day, the way she had spoken with such certainty about things she refused to explain. Ryan, sitting on the bunk across from him, noticed his distracted expression. "You all right? You've been quiet since the clinic." Derek hesitated before answering. "Something's off," he said slowly. "About the nurse. I don't know what it is, but something's off." "Off how?" "She handled my ankle like she's done it 1,000 times in situations way worse than a training injury," Derek explained. "And when I asked about the tattoo, she said something strange. Something about how curiosity isn't the problem, it's what people do with it." Ryan frowned, considering this. Maybe she used to work somewhere intense, a trauma unit or something. "Maybe," Derek said, though he did not sound convinced. "But Margaret warned us to watch ourselves. That's not the kind of thing you say about someone who just worked in a busy hospital." Tyler, listening from his own bunk nearby, sat up slightly. "You think she's hiding something?" "I think," Derek said slowly, "that we've been making a lot of assumptions about someone we know absolutely nothing about." The three men fell into an uneasy silence, each turning the day's events over in their minds. Outside, the base settled into its nighttime routine, lights dimming across the barracks, distant voices calling out final instructions before lights out. But inside Derek's mind, the pieces of an unfamiliar puzzle had begun to shift, though he still lacked the full picture. 2 days later, an announcement circulated through the facility that sent a wave of anticipation through every trainee and staff member alike. A senior naval officer, one of the most respected and decorated figures in the entire special operations community, would be visiting the facility for a scheduled medical evaluation and a brief inspection of the training program. His name alone commanded silence in any room, a living legend whose service record stretched back decades, filled with missions so classified that only fragments of his story had ever become public knowledge. Derek felt a surge of excitement, mixed with nervous energy at the news. Meeting a figure of such stature was a rare privilege, the kind of moment young trainees dreamed about throughout their entire training process. He spent the following 2 days going over everything he knew about the officer's service record, eager to make a good impression during the brief window they might interact. Claire, meanwhile, received the same announcement with far less enthusiasm than her colleagues. She read the notice posted in the staff break room, noted the name of the visiting officer, and felt something tighten in her chest, a sensation she had not experienced in years. She recognized the name immediately, though she gave no outward sign of it to anyone around her. She excused herself quietly to the supply closet, closed the door behind her, and stood alone for a long moment, staring at nothing in particular, her mind pulled suddenly and forcefully back toward a past she had worked so hard to leave behind. The name on that announcement did not belong to a stranger. It belonged to someone whose fate had once rested entirely in her hands, during circumstances far removed from the quiet, orderly world of this stateside clinic. She took a slow breath, steadying herself, and reminded herself that the past could not simply be undone by a name on a piece of paper. She had a job to do, patients to care for, and a routine to maintain. Whatever memories the visit might stir, she would keep them buried, exactly where they had remained for years. But fate, as Claire would soon discover, rarely respects the boundaries people build around their past. The following day would bring a moment of reckoning that neither she nor Derek Coleman could have possibly anticipated, one that would unravel every assumption built over the past several days, and reveal a truth far more remarkable than anyone in that clinic could have imagined. The day of the visit arrived with a tension that seemed to hum through every corridor of the facility. Staff members moved with extra precision, instructors held themselves straighter than usual, and even the most seasoned personnel felt a flicker of nervous energy at the thought of hosting such a distinguished guest. Rear Admiral Grant Whitfield was not simply another officer passing through for a routine visit. He was a figure whose name carried weight across the entire special operations community, a man whose decades of service included missions so sensitive that most details remained locked away in classified files, accessible to only a handful of people with the highest clearance. Derek Coleman stood near the entrance of the main training building, alongside Ryan and Tyler, all three dressed in their sharpest uniforms, waiting for a glimpse of the legendary officer as his convoy arrived. Word had spread that the Admiral would be stopping by the clinic for a scheduled medical evaluation before touring the training facilities, and Derek felt a strange mixture of excitement and lingering unease, the events of the past few days still weighing on his mind. Inside the clinic, Claire Bennett prepared the examination room with the same careful attention she gave every patient, though her hands moved with a stiffness she rarely allowed herself to display. She had requested, quietly and without explanation, whether another nurse might handle the Admiral's evaluation instead, but the request had been denied due to scheduling constraints. There was no way around it. She would have to face this moment directly, whether she felt ready or not. At exactly the scheduled time, a small convoy of vehicles pulled into the facility, and a group of officers stepped out, moving with the disciplined efficiency of men and women who had spent their entire careers under pressure. At the center of the group walked Admiral Whitfield himself, a tall man in his early 60s, with silver hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of quiet, commanding presence that made every person nearby instinctively straighten their posture. He greeted the facility's commanding officer with a firm handshake and a brief exchange of pleasantries before being escorted toward the clinic for his evaluation. Derek watched from a distance, his heart pounding with a mixture of awe and anticipation as the Admiral passed by, his gaze steady and calm, taking in every detail of the facility around him. Inside the examination room, Claire stood ready, her clipboard in hand, her expression carefully neutral. When the door opened and Admiral Whitfield stepped inside, accompanied by an aide who remained near the doorway, Claire felt her chest tighten, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. "Admiral," she said, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her. "Please, have a seat." Whitfield studied her for a moment, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly, as though something about her voice or her posture had caught his attention. But he said nothing, simply nodding and taking a seat on the examination table as instructed. Claire began the evaluation methodically, checking his vital signs, reviewing his medical history, and asking the standard questions required for his assessment. Throughout the process, she kept her focus entirely on her clipboard and instruments, avoiding prolonged eye contact, though she could feel the Admiral's gaze occasionally drifting toward her with a curious intensity. "You have steady hands," Whitfield remarked at one point, watching her check his blood pressure with practiced efficiency. "Most nurses rush through this. You don't." "I was trained to be thorough, sir," Claire replied simply. "Where did you train?" Claire hesitated for the briefest moment, her fingers pausing on the blood pressure cuff. "Various places," she said carefully. "It's been a long career." Whitfield's eyes narrowed slightly at her deflection, but he did not press further, allowing the examination to continue. As Claire moved to check his shoulder mobility, part of the standard evaluation for officers of his age and service history, she asked him to remove his jacket and roll up his sleeve. The Admiral complied without hesitation, shrugging off his jacket and rolling his sleeve up past his elbow. As the fabric moved aside, a tattoo became visible on his forearm, faded with age but unmistakable in its design, a series of interlocking shapes surrounding a small emblem in the center. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the tattoo for a long moment, her clipboard slipping slightly in her grip, before she caught herself and steadied it. It was the same design as her own. Not similar, not close. Identical. The room fell into a heavy silence. Claire's aide, standing near the doorway, glanced between the Admiral and the nurse, sensing something significant had shifted in the atmosphere, though he could not quite understand what. Admiral Whitfield's eyes moved from his own forearm to Claire's face, studying her with an intensity that seemed to strip away every layer of composure she had built over the years. And then, slowly, his gaze drifted down toward her own forearm, still partially covered by her sleeve. "Roll up your sleeve," he said quietly, though it was not truly a request. Claire hesitated, her heart pounding, every instinct urging her to refuse, to make an excuse, to preserve the careful separation she had built between her past and her present. But something in the Admiral's eyes told her that hesitation would only confirm what he already suspected. Slowly, she rolled up her sleeve, revealing the tattoo she had kept hidden for years, the same design, the same emblem, faded in nearly identical fashion. Admiral Whitfield stared at her forearm for a long moment, and then his expression shifted entirely. The sharp, evaluating gaze softened into something closer to disbelief, followed almost immediately by a flicker of profound recognition. "It can't be," he murmured, almost to himself. "After all these years." Claire swallowed hard, her carefully maintained composure finally beginning to crack. "Admiral, Bennett," he said suddenly, the name falling from his lips like a puzzle piece clicking into place. "Claire Bennett. You went by a different name back then, didn't you? Everyone called you something else in the field." Claire's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time since he had entered the room, she allowed herself to truly look at him, to see past the silver hair and the added years, back to a memory buried deep within her mind, a memory of chaos, of urgency, of a desperate fight to save a life that had seemed impossible to save. "You remember," she whispered. "How could I forget the person who kept me alive?" Whitfield said, his voice thick with an emotion rarely displayed by a man of his rank and reputation. "I owe you a debt I could never possibly repay." Outside the examination room, unaware of the extraordinary exchange taking place within, Derek Coleman waited near the clinic entrance, hoping for a brief glimpse of the Admiral as he emerged from his evaluation. He had no idea that the woman he and his friends had mocked for days, the quiet nurse they had nicknamed Ink, was at that very moment standing face to face with a living legend, the two of them bound together by a shared history far more significant than any of them could have imagined. Inside the room, Admiral Whitfield rose from the examination table, his earlier formality entirely replaced by something warmer, more personal. He studied Claire's face carefully, taking in the years that had passed since their paths had last crossed under circumstances neither of them could easily forget. "I need to speak with the commanding officer of this facility," Whitfield said, turning toward his aide near the doorway. "Immediately." The aide nodded quickly and stepped out to relay the request, leaving Whitfield and Claire alone once again in the quiet examination room. "You never told anyone," Whitfield said, studying her closely. "Did you?" Claire shook her head slowly. "I wanted a quiet life. I wanted to help people without carrying the weight of what happened before. Nobody here knows anything about my past, and I intended to keep it that way." "That may not be possible any longer," Whitfield said gently. "Not after what you did for me. Not after everything you accomplished during that mission. People deserve to know the kind of person they have working among them." Claire's throat tightened. "Admiral, please, I don't need recognition. I never wanted it." "I understand," Whitfield said, his voice softening further. "But some truths have a way of surfacing whether we want them to or not. And I think it's time this particular truth finally saw the light." Before Claire could respond, the door opened, and the facility's commanding officer stepped inside, along with several other senior staff members who had been summoned at the Admiral's request. Word had begun to spread quickly through the building that something significant was unfolding within the clinic, and curious eyes had already begun gathering near the entrance, including those belonging to Derek Coleman, Ryan Brooks, and Tyler Ford, who exchanged confused glances as they watched senior officers hurry past them toward the examination room. Whatever quiet, ordinary life Claire Bennett had built for herself at this facility was about to change entirely, and the truth she had guarded so carefully for years was finally on the verge of coming into the open, in front of the very people who had spent the past several days mocking her for the tattoo she had never wanted to explain. The commanding officer, a stern man named Colonel Grant Ashby, entered the examination room with visible confusion, clearly unprepared for whatever situation had prompted such an urgent summons from a visiting admiral of Whitfield's stature. Several other senior staff members followed close behind, filling the small room until it felt crowded with rank and curiosity in equal measure. "Admiral," Ashby said, straightening his posture, "you requested my presence?" Whitfield nodded, glancing briefly at Claire, who stood quietly beside the examination table, her sleeve still rolled up, the tattoo on her forearm now fully visible to everyone in the room. "Colonel, I believe there's something important you should know about one of your nurses." Ashby's eyes flicked toward Claire, then toward her exposed forearm, though he clearly did not understand the significance of what he was looking at. "I'm not sure I follow, sir." Whitfield took a slow breath, choosing his words carefully. "Many years ago, before most of the personnel in this building were even old enough to enlist, I served on a mission that very few people know the true details of, even to this day. It was part of a specialized program that paired elite combat teams with highly trained field medics. individuals capable of providing advanced trauma care in the most extreme and dangerous conditions imaginable. These medics operated directly alongside combat units during missions too sensitive for standard medical support. The room fell silent as Whitfield continued, his voice carrying the weight of memory and gratitude in equal measure. During one such mission, our team came under heavy and sustained engagement in hostile territory. I was severely wounded, injuries that under most circumstances would have been fatal long before we could reach proper medical evacuation. The nearest hospital was hours away, and our situation was deteriorating rapidly. He paused, glancing at Claire again, who stood with her eyes lowered slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. The medic assigned to our team that day performed emergency procedures under fire, in conditions that would challenge even the most experienced trauma surgeons working in a fully equipped hospital. She stabilized my injuries using nothing more than field equipment and sheer determination, keeping me alive long enough to reach evacuation. Without her actions that day, I would not be standing in this room speaking to you now. Derek Coleman, who had slipped quietly into the back of the crowded doorway along with Ryan and Tyler, felt his stomach drop as the pieces began falling into place. He glanced at Claire, at the tattoo on her arm, at the weight of the story unfolding before him, and a wave of shame washed over him unlike anything he had experienced before. That medic, Whitfield continued, his voice growing quieter but no less firm, sits in this room with us today. Claire Bennett was not simply a battlefield medic. She was one of the finest combat trauma specialists our military has ever trained, part of an elite program so selective that fewer than a handful of individuals completed it each year. The tattoo she carries on her arm is not a fashion choice, or a personal decision made lightly. It is a mark given only to those who completed that program and served in its most demanding assignments. A mark earned through blood, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to saving lives under conditions most people could never imagine. Colonel Ashby's expression shifted from confusion to genuine astonishment as he turned to look at Claire with entirely new eyes. "I had no idea," he said quietly. Her file listed standard nursing credentials, nothing about specialized combat medical service. "Much of that record remains classified," Whitfield explained, "for very good reason. The program she served in operated under strict secrecy, and many of its members chose, understandably, to leave that chapter of their lives behind, once their service concluded. I imagine that's precisely why Nurse Bennett requested a quiet assignment here, away from any recognition or attention regarding her past." Every eye in the room turned toward Claire, who remained standing with quiet dignity, despite the weight of sudden, unwanted attention. She had spent years avoiding exactly this moment, the unraveling of the careful privacy she had built around herself. And yet now that it had finally happened, she felt an unexpected sense of relief mixed with the discomfort of exposure. "I never wanted recognition," Claire said softly, addressing the room. "What happened during my service was never about receiving credit or praise. It was about doing everything possible to save the people counting on me, no matter the circumstances. I left that life behind because I wanted peace, not because I regretted what I did." Whitfield stepped closer to her, his expression filled with genuine warmth and respect. "And that peace is exactly what you deserve. But I also believe the people around you deserve to understand the caliber of person they have working among them, especially those young trainees who may benefit tremendously from your experience and guidance." Derek felt the weight of the Admiral's words settle over him like a physical force. He thought back to every mocking comment he had made, every joke shared at Claire's expense, every assumption built entirely on ignorance and arrogance. Shame burned in his chest, hot and undeniable, as he realized just how badly he had misjudged the quiet, unassuming nurse who had treated his sprained ankle with such steady, practiced skill only days earlier. Whitfield's gaze drifted toward the doorway, where Derek, Ryan, and Tyler stood among the small crowd of onlookers. Something in his expression suggested he was already aware of the treatment Claire had endured over the past several days, whether through direct observation or simply intuition born from decades of understanding how young trainees often behave toward unfamiliar faces. "I understand there's been some teasing directed toward Nurse Bennett recently," Whitfield said, his voice carrying just enough authority to draw immediate attention from everyone present. "Regarding her tattoo, specifically." The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Derek felt his face flush with embarrassment as several heads turned in his direction, though the Admiral did not point him out directly. I would encourage everyone in this facility to remember something important, Whitfield continued, his tone measured but firm. You never truly know the full story behind the people you encounter. The quiet, unassuming individual standing beside you may carry experiences and sacrifices far beyond anything you could imagine. Judgment based on assumption rather than understanding rarely leads anywhere productive, and it certainly does a disservice to those who have given far more than most of us will ever be asked to give. Claire, listening to the Admiral's words, felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she had not experienced in a very long time. For years, she had carried her past quietly, almost as a burden, uncertain how the world might react if it ever learned the truth. But standing here now, surrounded by senior officers, and witnessing the genuine respect radiating from a man she had once saved from certain loss, she began to feel something shift within her, a small crack in the wall she had built around herself. Colonel Ashby cleared his throat, addressing the room with renewed authority. I think it's clear that Nurse Bennett's contributions to this facility, and to this entire branch of service, deserve far more recognition than they have received thus far. I'll be reviewing how we can better support and acknowledge her expertise moving forward. Whitfield nodded approvingly, before turning back toward Claire, his expression softening into something more personal and less formal. Thank you, he said simply, the two words carrying the full weight of years of gratitude finally given voice. For everything you did that day, and for everything you continue to do now, even in quiet anonymity. Claire felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, though she blinked them back, unwilling to lose her composure entirely in front of such a large audience. It was my duty, Admiral, and my honor. The room slowly began to empty as senior staff members filed out, murmuring among themselves about the remarkable revelation they had just witnessed. Derek, Ryan, and Tyler remained near the doorway a moment longer, watching as Claire and the Admiral continued their quiet conversation, the years of unspoken history between them, finally given the space to breathe. Derek felt a heavy weight settle in his chest, an undeniable urge to make things right, though he was unsure exactly how to begin addressing the disrespect he had shown over the past several days. He glanced at Ryan and Tyler, both of whom wore similarly shaken expressions, and silently, without needing to exchange words, the three of them understood that an apology, a real and sincere one, was owed to the woman they had so carelessly mocked. As the crowd continued to disperse, Claire remained standing beside Admiral Whitfield, the tattoo on her forearm no longer hidden, no longer a source of shame or mockery, but now a symbol finally recognized for exactly what it represented, a mark of extraordinary service, quiet sacrifice, and unwavering dedication to saving lives under the most impossible circumstances imaginable. News of what had happened inside the clinic spread through the facility with remarkable speed, and by the following morning, nearly everyone had heard some version of the story, though the details varied depending on who was telling it. Some said Claire had once served alongside the Admiral himself. Others claimed she had been part of a secret medical unit whose missions remained locked away in classified files. Regardless of which version reached each corner of the base, one thing remained consistent across every retelling. The quiet nurse everyone had underestimated was far more remarkable than anyone had realized. Derek Coleman arrived at the clinic early that morning, before his scheduled training session, his stomach tight with nerves he rarely experienced. He had spent much of the previous night replaying every mocking comment, every careless joke, every moment of disrespect he had directed toward Claire since her arrival. The weight of his own behavior sat uncomfortably in his chest, and he knew there was only one way to begin easing that discomfort. He found Claire in the supply room, organizing bandages and medical equipment with her usual quiet efficiency. She glanced up as he entered, her expression neutral, giving no indication of surprise at his unexpected visit. "Nurse Bennett," Derek began, his voice noticeably less confident than usual. "Do you have a moment?" Claire straightened, setting aside the supplies in her hands. "Of course." Derek shifted uncomfortably, searching for the right words. "I owe you an apology. A real one, not just something quick to make myself feel better. What I said about your tattoo, the nickname, all of it, it was wrong. I made assumptions about you without knowing anything real about your life or what you've been through, and that wasn't fair to you." Claire studied him for a long moment, her expression softening slightly. "Thank you for saying that." "I mean it," Derek continued, encouraged by her response. "Yesterday, Hearing what the Admiral said, learning what you actually did, what you sacrificed, it made me realize how little I actually understood. You treated my ankle with more care and skill than I probably deserved, after how I treated you, and I never even considered what kind of experience might be behind that kind of skill. Claire allowed a small, genuine smile to appear, the first Derek had seen from her since her arrival at the facility. Everyone makes assumptions sometimes. What matters is what you do once you learn the truth. I appreciate you coming to say this. Behind Derek, Ryan and Tyler appeared in the doorway, both looking equally uncertain and remorseful. They had clearly come seeking the same opportunity Derek had already taken. We wanted to apologize too, Ryan said, stepping forward hesitantly. For everything. The jokes, the nickname, all of it. It wasn't right, and we're sorry. Tyler nodded in agreement, his usual confident demeanor replaced by genuine humility. We had no idea about your background. If we had known even a fraction of what you've actually done, we never would have said any of those things. Claire looked between the three young men, each of them clearly carrying the weight of their earlier behavior, and felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, not from any desire for revenge or vindication, but from witnessing genuine growth and reflection. I appreciate all of your apologies, she said sincerely, but I want you to understand something important. This isn't really about my past or what I did years ago. It's about how we treat people in general, regardless of what we know or don't know about their history. Everyone you meet carries a story you can't see just by looking at them. Some people have faced incredibly difficult experiences, and they carry those experiences quietly, without seeking attention or recognition. Others may simply be having a difficult day, dealing with challenges you know nothing about. Either way, the lesson is the same. Lead with respect, not assumption. Derek nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling deeply within him. That's a lesson I won't forget anytime soon. None of us will, Ryan added, and Tyler nodded in agreement. Claire smiled again, a warmth reaching her eyes that had rarely appeared during her time at the facility. Then something good came from all of this, even if it started with a rough beginning. Later that same day, Admiral Whitfield requested a private meeting with Claire before his departure from the facility, having extended his visit slightly longer than originally scheduled due to the significance of their reunion. They sat together in a quiet office, away from the bustling activity of the clinic and training grounds, finally able to speak freely, without the weight of an audience. I meant what I said yesterday, Whitfield began, his tone gentle but sincere. You deserve far more recognition than you've received, and I'd like to see that change, if you're willing. Claire considered his words carefully. I never wanted recognition, Admiral. I only wanted to help people, quietly and without fuss. I understand that desire completely, Whitfield replied. But there's a difference between seeking recognition and sharing your experience in a way that could genuinely benefit others. These young trainees, the ones training to become the next generation of special operations personnel, they need guidance from someone who truly understands what it means to provide medical care under extreme pressure. Your experience could save lives, Claire, not just through direct treatment, but through the knowledge and training you could pass along to others. Claire remained quiet for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. She thought about Derek, Ryan, and Tyler, about the shift she had witnessed in their attitudes over the past day, about the possibility of shaping young medical personnel and trainees before they ever faced the kind of extreme circumstances she had once endured. What exactly are you proposing? She finally asked. A consulting position, Whitfield explained, working directly with the training program for incoming personnel, teaching advanced trauma care techniques specifically designed for combat and high-pressure situations. You would have full control over how much of your personal history you choose to share. The focus would be entirely on passing along your expertise, not reliving painful memories for the sake of storytelling. Claire considered the offer seriously, recognizing both the challenge and the opportunity it presented. For years, she had kept her past locked away, believing that peace could only be found through complete separation from that chapter of her life. But perhaps, she realized, peace could also be found through purpose, through using her hard-earned experience to protect and prepare others, rather than simply leaving it buried and unused. I'll consider it, she said finally. Truly consider it, not just as a polite response. Whitfield smiled, clearly pleased with her openness to the idea. That's all I ask. Take whatever time you need. Over the following weeks, Claire gradually settled into a new rhythm at the facility, one that included occasional training sessions with incoming personnel, sharing carefully selected lessons from her extensive experience without revealing every painful detail of her past service. Derek, Ryan, and Tyler became some of her most attentive students, eager to absorb every piece of knowledge she offered, their earlier arrogance replaced entirely by genuine respect and humility. One afternoon, during a routine training exercise, Derek approached Claire as she prepared supplies for a demonstration on field trauma care. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Claire glanced up, a small smile already forming. "Always. That first day, when we saw your tattoo and started making jokes, did it bother you as much as it seemed like it should have?" Claire paused, considering the question honestly. "It did," she admitted. "More than I let on, honestly. But I've learned that some battles aren't worth fighting with anger. Sometimes the best response is simply continuing to do good work and letting the truth reveal itself naturally, in its own time." Derek nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad it did. The truth revealing itself, I mean, because I would have gone a lot longer without understanding what an incredible person you actually are." Claire's smile widened slightly, genuine warmth radiating through her expression. "Thank you, Derek. That means more than you probably realize." As the training session continued, Claire rolled up her sleeve without hesitation, the tattoo on her forearm now fully visible, no longer hidden beneath careful layers of fabric and quiet secrecy. The mark that had once brought mockery and misunderstanding now stood as a symbol of respect among everyone who had come to know her story, a quiet reminder that true strength often hides beneath the most unassuming exteriors, waiting patiently for the moment when the truth finally has the chance to shine through. Derek watched her demonstrate a precise trauma care technique to the gathered trainees, her hands moving with the same steady confidence he had noticed on that very first day, and he found himself grateful, deeply and sincerely grateful, for the lesson she had taught him, not through anger or confrontation, but through quiet dignity and unwavering excellence. The tattoo that once sparked ridicule had become something else entirely, a story of resilience, sacrifice, and the quiet power of a woman who had never needed recognition to know the true value of her own extraordinary service.